Zara's trembling fingers clutched her boarding pass as the gate agent's sneer cut deeper than any knife. "I don't care who your father supposedly is. You two aren't getting on this flight," he spat, loud enough for the crowd to hear. The identical twins exchanged a look. They had been here before, treated like criminals for simply existing. But this time was different. As Zara unlocked her phone, Nia whispered to it. That single call wouldn't just change their night, it would ground an entire airline and crack open decades of buried discrimination. "Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from, and if you stand against injustice, hit like and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth." Zara and Nia Jackson weren't ordinary teenagers. At just 17, the identical twins had already carved out reputations as honor students, debate champions, and scholarship hopefuls for top universities. They carried themselves with the kind of quiet determination that comes from parents who raised them to know their worth in a world that often tried to strip it away. For them, this trip was supposed to be simple, a weekend flight home after a statewide academic competition. They arrived at the bustling airport like any other passengers, dressed neatly, luggage in hand, their excitement softened by exhaustion. But as they approached the check-in desk, the energy shifted. The gate agent's eyes lingered on their skin, not their tickets. His tone carried a sharpness that passengers before them hadn't received. Each question was delivered with suspicion, as though two teenage girls traveling alone couldn't possibly belong in first-class seats. It wasn't the first time they'd felt it, that familiar chill of being watched, judged, and doubted. The stares at security, the whispered comments about random checks, the sudden demand for extra ID, even though their documents were flawless. Zara tried to brush it off, reminding herself that home was just a few hours away. But Nia noticed the way the agent's lips curled, the way the word policy seemed to be weaponized against them. What should have been a routine boarding began to feel like a trial. And as tension built with every unnecessary delay, neither sister could shake the feeling that this night would test them in ways they had never faced before. The boarding area buzzed with announcements and the shuffle of tired travelers, but for Zara and Nia, time seemed to slow. Their boarding passes had been scanned and rescanned, yet the gate agent shook his head with deliberate disdain. "These seats aren't valid. Step aside," his voice carried, drawing stares from curious passengers. Zara felt heat rising in her cheeks as whispers rippled through the crowd. Other travelers with similar tickets walked right past them, boarding without question. A man in a suit flashed a half-smile, sliding through the gate without a single delay. Yet when Zara handed over her pass again, the agent leaned forward as if savoring the moment. "First class is full. You'll have to wait." Nia's jaw tightened. They had paid for these seats, or rather, their father had. But that didn't matter here. What mattered was the quiet, unspoken judgment in the attendant's eyes, the assumption that two young black girls couldn't possibly belong where they were. Security was summoned next, their presence heavy and immediate. One officer demanded additional ID, another pawed through their carefully packed bags, scattering clothes across the floor while passengers stepped over them. A third questioned why two minors were traveling alone, ignoring the fact that Zara and Nia were nearly adults with all the right paperwork in hand. Every moment stretched longer, more humiliating. The crowd grew restless, some shaking their heads, others pulling out phones to record. The twins could hear fragments of conversations around them. What did they do? Why are they being held up? Probably something they're not telling us. The sting of assumption cut deep. Zara tried to steady her voice, asking once more why they were being delayed. The response came like a hammer. "You are not cleared to board. Step back or you'll be escorted out." No explanation. No accountability. Just a wall of authority standing in their way. For a moment, Zara considered retreating. She hated confrontation, hated the spotlight of hostile eyes. But then she looked at Nia, whose trembling hands were clenched in fists at her sides. This wasn't just about two seats, it was about dignity, about refusing to be erased in plain sight. The breaking point came when another group of passengers, white, laughing, carefree, was allowed to walk through without so much as a question. Same tickets, same flight, no resistance. The contrast was undeniable, and the injustice pressed against the sisters like a weight. Nia leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "Enough. Call him." Zara hesitated, her phone heavy in her pocket. She knew what dialing that number meant, not just for them, but for everyone in this airport. The man on the other end wasn't just their father. He was the one person with the power to unravel everything this airline thought it could hide. Her fingers hovered, trembling, over the screen. Around them, the gate buzzed louder, the line of passengers growing impatient. The officer's stares bore into them, daring them to resist. And as Nia's eyes met hers steady, unflinching, Zara knew the moment had come. The call was placed, and with it, the first crack appeared in the wall of silence the airline had built for years. The line went silent the moment their father answered. Zara's voice cracked as she explained what had happened. The denial, the humiliation, the way security had treated them like suspects instead of students. For a moment, she feared he might dismiss it as another inconvenience. But then his voice hardened, steady and commanding. "Stay where you are. Don't move." Within minutes, the atmosphere at the gate shifted. Phones rang, radios buzzed. Supervisors in sharp suits appeared, whispering urgently into earpieces. The officers who had stood tall just moments earlier suddenly stepped back, uncertain. The gate agent who had sneered at them now avoided their gaze, his smirk fading into unease. Something was happening, something bigger than the sisters could fully grasp. Passengers around them sensed it too. The whispers grew louder. "What's going on? Why are they holding up the flight? Did those girls do something?" Cameras lifted, capturing every second, every flicker of tension, and then the announcement hit like thunder. Every outbound flight for Mid-Atlantic Airlines was suspended. Crews were ordered to stand down. Planes already taxiing were called back. Confusion swept the terminal as angered travelers demanded answers. Yet at the center of it all, Zara and Nia stood frozen, watching the ripples of one phone call turn into a tidal wave. The truth was undeniable now. Their father wasn't just a passenger. He was the man who signed off on every budget, every fleet expansion, every contract that kept the airline alive. And in that moment, he made it clear, if his daughters weren't welcome in first class, no one was flying. The supervisors rushed forward, apologizing in hurried tones, offering explanations that fell flat. Misunderstanding, procedural error, standard protocol, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Phones kept recording, social media lit up with live streams and hashtags. What had started as to teenagers being denied boarding had become a national spectacle of corporate accountability. For Zara and Nia, the humiliation hadn't disappeared. It still burned deep. But now, their pain was no longer invisible. It was front-page news, undeniable proof of a system that had operated unchecked for years. And as the airline's leadership scrambled to contain the fallout, one truth echoed louder than any boarding call. The days of hiding discrimination behind closed doors were over. The sisters exchanged a look: fear, relief, and something else: resolve. This was bigger than them now. This was a reckoning. By the next morning, headlines stretched across every major outlet. Airline grounded after racism allegations. The sisters' faces were everywhere. Shared across social media, replayed on news broadcasts, discussed in classrooms and living rooms nationwide. What had once been just another humiliating episode of discrimination had become a flashpoint for change. Zara and Nia's father stood firm. He demanded not only apologies, but accountability, system-wide reforms, new training protocols, and an independent investigation into patterns of discrimination within the airline. For the company, it wasn't just about saving face anymore. It was about survival. Their reputation, their stock value, their very future was now tied to whether they truly addressed the injustice they had inflicted. For the twins, the moment was bittersweet. They still carried the sting of that day, the sneer at the gate, the suspicion in the officer's eyes, the way the crowd had silently watched until power intervened. But now, their story wasn't hidden in whispers or brushed aside with excuses. It was documented, undeniable, and echoed in the voices of countless others who had suffered the same but never been heard. The question was no longer whether racism existed in the everyday spaces of travel. It was how long the world would continue to allow it. Their story wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure, accountability, and change. And as Zara scrolled through the endless stream of messages, people thanking them, sharing their own experiences, calling them brave, she realized something profound. They hadn't just grounded planes, they had lifted voices. This was more than a family's victory. It was a reminder that when injustice is exposed, when silence is broken, entire systems can be forced to reckon with the truth. So ask yourself, if two teenagers can stop an airline with nothing more than courage and truth, what could happen if we all refuse to stay silent?